Let's start. I'm sure many of our audience is very familiar with your career, but just your proven track record that you have in media. You started in local news, worked your way up to becoming one of the most influential news executives in the country, creator of Morning Joe, helped create CBS This Morning, led Stephen Colbert. All before then, you went to lead CNN. I bet you a lot of people are wondering what you've been up to since you've left CNN. So let's start there.
Well, it's good to be here. I will say first, I can't let it pass. I did not create Morning Joe. Joe Scarborough created Morning Joe, just because I'll get a phone call.
Been a lot back and forth.
So I have this really unique situation of having time. Mm-hmm. And so what do you do with that time? And I have decided sort of to make my full-time job to figure out where things are going. Because whatever I do next, I don't want it to be, something that isn't building and forward-looking, but no one really knows where things are headed. So I would say for the last year or so, I have taken it upon myself as my full-time job to just meet people and talk to people. And I've been very rigid about how I do it. I am up to about 275 conversations. Wow. I keep track of them in Salesforce software. What did I learn? What is this person? What's unique about what they're trying to do? And generally, it's people that I've never interacted with before. And it's so ironic because when you run these large organizations, you're so hyper-focused on what you're doing that you don't really have a chance for a lot of external focus. Mm-hmm. So that's what I've been up to, meeting people, talking to people, learning, listening, not really looking to jump back in immediately, but through those conversations, advising some companies. I went and taught a class up at my alma mater at Syracuse on the future of media, which was more, hey guys, what's the future of media? As opposed to me saying it, and trying to be a better dad and husband and getting my pilot's license.
There you go.
So that's kind of what.
That's a heck of a lot. It sounds like you've been very busy in the time since you left CNN. You mentioned the fact that you've had 275 conversations with various individuals as an observer of the media industry. I'm curious what you have thought about the transition that we are undergoing right now and what that tells us about the future of the media industry.
I would say that I'm much more bullish on the future than most people are because of these conversations, that there are a lot of really interesting people doing really interesting things successfully that you've never heard of. And there's a lot of people working on satiating what is a massive desire to consume content, whether it's in entertainment or news, and finding ways to do that outside the current legacy system. So eventually, some of these things will bubble up and be either co-opted by the legacy companies or will just propel past them. But there's really smart, interesting people that are, I think, going to be the future of where the business goes.
What does that tell us then about the future of traditional media? You mentioned the fact that they maybe either have to adapt to some of these changing times or they might be surpassed by some of these smaller, more niche players. Is there a way out for a place like CNN?
Listen, there's nothing more annoying than someone who's in it trying to, slay dragons 24/7 to have some asshole go, well, I really don't think they really need to, so I'm not going to do that. But I will say there isn't a media executive that doesn't know that there's a problem. There isn't a media executive that isn't actively working on that problem. But I don't know that, here are some facts. The facts are that people have lost trust in legacy media. That's not me saying that, that's a demonstrable fact. That has not happened in the last 6 months. That is something that's been happening for a long time, and people are tuning out.
Right.
So can legacy media reinvent itself in a way that then can reconnect with people and become relevant in their lives again and become trusted? I don't know. But there are definitely people who are starting from scratch that don't have that scale, but possibly those two worlds will come together. And I think the people that figure it out, there's a lot of economic upside, but also for our society, because you can't exist in a low trust society, which is where we are right now. And I think it's important to delineate between two things, right? There is trusted sources of information, and then there's trusted opinion. And I think those two worlds need to be very separate. And I think part of the problem is they've kind of commingled.
Yeah.
And, media organizations will try very hard to say, no, this is our news gathering and this is our opinion. But in the world, people don't make that distinction, I have found. So I think that what you're going to see is someone's got to figure out how to restore trust, and that these are the facts. And then let people go and have their opinions, but they want to go armed with what the actual facts are. And right now, we used to have one set of facts, and then you could have 30 discussions around that set of facts. Now you have 30 sets of facts and 1,000 discussions around those sets of facts. And that has to change, or we're in big trouble as a society, which is a much bigger issue.
And I guess, how do you do that in what will soon be the environment? I guess right now it is the current environment. You have President-elect returning to the White House. He has been very vocal about fake news. He attacked CNN multiple times over the last 6 to 8 years. How much more complicated is rebuilding that trust than under a second Trump presidency?
I think these are issues that are larger than just a Trump presidency, but my completely unsolicited and I'm sure annoying advice is swing at the pitches that are thrown. To completely butcher a Chris Rock phrase, if someone kills 8 people, don't say they killed 9. He's gonna do enough things that really require scrutiny and sounding the alarm bells. Don't say, well, this means this and that means that's going to happen. Say, he did this, and then let's discuss what that means. Not, well, this is going to mean this. Because a lot of times the media gets in trouble when they predict things. And I would say there's been as an observer, a lot of hyperbole around what a Trump presidency will mean. And it's the end of democracy. Well, if 4 years from now it's not, then we have a problem with credibility. So instead, he's appointed this person. This is this person's track record. Not, that means he's going to do this, right? That would be my unsolicited advice of, there will be enough to discuss. There will be enough things that are going to be controversial, but he and his people know exactly what they're doing when they try to gin up what one of my former colleagues called outrage porn. If everything is an 11 and everything is outrageous, then you're able to kind of slip through some things that are actually should create that outrage.
I'm curious, one of the my big takeaways, and there's many takeaways from this most recent election, but one of them in terms of media was the decline, obviously, in traditional media and the rise in alternative media. And I say that with the rise of podcasts and maybe the influence that has really had, especially it seems to be among younger male audience. I'm curious, is there a way that traditional media can shift and adapt to this new reality? And what does that look like? Is it more gender-based? Does it change depending on gender, depending on demographics? I guess, how should the media be thinking about that?
So again, I'm speaking really about opinion. And in an ideal world, those podcasts, et cetera, would get this one set of agreed upon facts. But in absence of that, what you have happening is people are building communities. And so if you're not getting what you need from the traditional world, you go someplace where there's a like-minded community. And television, just broadly speaking, is not a visual medium, it's a connection medium. And if people can connect and build a community, that's where people will go. Now, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing if you're dealing with the right set of facts. Can traditional media create that kind of community without sacrificing their impartiality? I don't know. It's tough to imagine that you would build a community around, well, that's true, right? You want to build that community upon taking those facts and like, what does that mean? And I think this is an investor conference. I would invest in something that is going to roll up some of these people and personalities that have built a community so that you can then scale it. I see that happening. I'm involved in those conversations. That's where people are thinking, because there's people out there that are making a go of it based upon truth-telling or not being afraid to question things and not being part of the mass, groupthink. And if you can tap into that and scale it, that's a good place to maybe monetize the future.
Those that are successful in doing that and those that aren't, the conversations that you've been having, what is it, that differentiating factor?
Authenticity. And that works, I think, no matter whether it's a late night talk show or you're a news broadcaster or you're an opinion person. If your opinion or your analysis of what's happening is authentic to who your audience sees as who you are, then that is what makes you successful. If you are contouring yourself to match some kind of ideology or to not piss off a certain group of people, or people see right through that, right? I think the ones that are going to get rewarded are people that have fortitude, they're fearless, they speak the truth, their truth. They are not afraid of pissing off some kind of, imaginary horde of online people that are going to descend on you for having a dissenting opinion. And I think you've seen that a little in the election. That was the electorate kind of going, we don't want that. And I think broadcasters that can tap into that, and there's people that do it very well. There's people at mainstream legacy media companies that do that very well, and there are those who don't. And I think that's where you're going to see success tied to.
It's interesting. It reminds me of some of the headlines really that we've seen. Even this week, you have Chris Wallace leaving CNN. Apparently he is thinking about, reportedly wants to focus full time on long form podcasting. There was also a report out today talking about the fact that we might see more cost cutting measures at places like CNN just because of the decline that we've seen in ratings. I'm curious, if you take a name like Chris Wallace or some of these other bigger names that have a proven following in traditional media, what does that look like once they do go out on their own? And I guess what are some of the things that we can learn about just in terms of how people will then consume media and whether or not that is a threat or not a threat to democracy as you talk about more of the opinionated programming getting more viewership?
Look, I think if people are getting as their primary source of information from people that have no journalistic guardrails, that's very dangerous. And I think as we go forward, truth and what actually is happening, because we will have a president that has a loose relationship with the truth, will become almost a commodity. It'll become something, and there may be some big event that forces everyone to go, no, but what's really happening? And if someone can emerge as like, this is what's happening, and perhaps there becomes like a Bloomberg terminal for truth, right? That people who operate in the world, whether you're in finance or government, or you operate where you actually have to know what's happening, that can almost be a wholesale product. I think that's the direction we're moving in. And again, if you're one of these talent that could then take that truth and interpret it for your people that are in your community, that will be the pathway to success. And there are people that have followings that can go and make a perfectly decent living, but can you scale it? Because you're always going to reach many more people on a CNN than you will, generally speaking, unless you're Megyn Kelly or Joe Rogan or some of these people that have massive followings on your own platform.
What do you think about the thought of the death of cable news? Is that greatly exaggerated? As you look 5, 10, maybe even 15 years out, is that a reality?
I think it's like the death of radio, right? I think it will absolutely decline. The sub fees will decline, and that's why you're seeing cost cutting. I think there's a floor. I don't think that one day you're going to wake up and there's 0 cable subscriptions, but there might be different ways to distribute said signal, because at its heart, news is a passive. It's something you have on in the background usually, and so it's less successful when you have to go and like press a button and watch it and have it on at the, there is, as soon as you start having kids and have to get kids ready in the morning and make breakfast and all that stuff, you want it on in the background, and that is passive viewing. And so what is that going to look like? How is that distributed? Might be different, but I don't think the legacy linear feed, it might be distributed a different way, but I don't know that there's going to be a death of it. I think you're always going to need that kind of passive viewing experience.
Chris, they say hindsight's always 20/20, so I got to ask you, if you were taking over CNN today, would you do anything different this time around?
Oh, yes.
And what would that be?
That's really between me and my therapist.
Anything you want to share with us?
No, look.
It's always good to share.
In all seriousness, I have spent an enormous amount of time not worrying about the situation I was in, but how could I have handled those situations differently? The things that I could have controlled. And so that is something I spent genuinely a lot of time and a lot of sort of humbleness of saying, okay, not everyone was out to get me, right? Like, so what could I have done differently to have made the mission, more successful? Because remember, I left the greatest job in the world with Stephen Colbert, and I'd never wanted to get back into news, and I did it because I felt it was a calling, and because I'm a journalist at heart, and it's devastating to me that it didn't work out. So yeah, there's a lot of learnings, but we're really running late on time.
Well, what's next? Will you return to the control room, do you think, one day?
Right now, I think whatever I do, and I still have a little bit of time, but whatever I end up doing, it's going to be with people I want to do it with. It's going to be something I can be proud of. It's going to be something that's fun. And it's going to be something that I can build with somebody and help them. A lot of these conversations always sort of ends with, is there anything I can do to help you? And many of them have taken me up on that offer. So as anyone who's in the startup business or in the building business knows, there's a lot of times there are fits and starts. And so, yeah, there could be like 3 or 4 major things that I'm a part of, or 0. So it's really about putting out into the world, is there something I can do to help? And the groups or the organizations I'm working with is everything from like a startup that's built a virtual control room that can absolutely change production as we know it. An AI company in Israel, an Israeli company that stops deepfake AI by using AI, a YouTube sports company, so like there's that kind of stuff, and then there's people who have capital that are very interested in solving this problem, and I'm as much as I can help with that, I'm doing that too. So keeping busy, and also enjoying time with my family, and I would say reintroducing myself to my kids and having my wife say, oh, you have parenting thoughts, so that's interesting. Well, welcome back, but really trying to make the most of this time as much as possible.
Well, unfortunately, we are out of time. Wish we had double the time here. But Chris, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today.
Thanks.